and welcome again to another edition of Public Affairs Public Access. I'm your guest host, David Hutzelman, and this is a show where we regularly talk about public policy, political philosophy, even a little politics from a libertarian perspective. And to clarify things, I'm often asked about, well, what is a libertarian perspective anyway? And just to summarize it in a real short capsule is libertarians are people that believe in basically the free market economy, not the over-regulated crony capitalism system that we have in the United States today. We're very supportive of civil liberties and your ability to live your own lifestyle to your own personal standards as long as you're not harming other people. And we're for a very kind of skeptical foreign policy. We don't believe in trying to impose our rightfully based rules in democracy and freedom on other countries, and realize that that's a slow process that's not going to be promoted by military force. There's all kinds of libertarians. There are small L libertarians and large L libertarians. I'm happen to be here tonight with a couple of large L libertarians, which I am, or used to be, or still am. And we have two candidates of the Libertarian Party coming up in this fall's election. And I would certainly, to start with, encourage everyone to carefully listen to their views and hopefully vote for them. But to start that off, I have two candidates, one for Supreme Court Court of Appeals, Place 8, Mark Ashe, local attorney running as a Libertarian. And he has a very important race because in his race, if he gets more than 5% of the vote in a statewide race which has no Democrat opponent other than a Republican opponent, Mark will have us qualified for ballot status for the next, 2 years or 4 years? I'm not sure which. But anyway, enough to get us to what I understand is going to be the repeal of the state party voting in the next election cycle, so that should be a help. And also on my left is Luke Spencer, who is a candidate for the Congressional District 18, which is currently occupied by Democratic incumbent Sheila Jackson Lee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. And we're going to have a conversation for the next hour about libertarian ideas, and particularly the ideas that are surfacing in these two election races. And let me encourage you to call in. There's going to be a phone number on the screen here, and if you want to call in and ask either of the candidates what their views are on basically just anything, it doesn't have to necessarily fall in with what we're talking about, please do. We'd welcome your calls, and hopefully we can stimulate some conversation that way. Well, I'd like to start off with Luke and let Luke tell us what brought him to this place in the electoral platform, how he was motivated to jump into politics at such a young and impressionable age, and what he hopes to accomplish by doing that.
Thank you.
Luke, it's all yours.
So my name is Luke Spencer, and I am the Libertarian Party candidate running for United States Congress against Sheila Jackson Lee, as David mentioned. I am a lifelong libertarian, which is unusual. Not a lot of people can make that claim. I've never voted Republican, and I've never voted Democrat. I was hooked or bit at a young age.
Good.
And the person who I think connected to my young mind was Harry Brown.
Wow.
I came across him on C-SPAN when I was 16 years old, just flipping channels one day. And he was the first politician that I ever heard that really made any sense to me. And that was it. I started finding out whatever I could about the party, what it believed in, its history.
Harry Brown was the author of How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, which was kind of an economic basis for how you should adjust your life in the face of all the government taxations and interference and everything else, and how you could free up your own personal life. So he was a big influence on a lot of libertarians, and he ran for president on the Libertarian Party ticket twice in the early 2000s. So it's
Yeah, he ran in '96, I believe,
it
in
was
2000.
yeah, it was
and
in,
that's when I saw him on television, was in '96. And then I was able to meet him in person
Okay.
when he came through Austin in 2000.
okay.
Does anyone know what he's doing these days?
He died.
Oh. Well, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, right. He
I did.
passed away from, I can't
didn't hear
remember,
that
I think it
news.
was like Lou Gehrig's disease or something that was pretty degenerative. But yeah, I'd met
Sorry to
Gehrig
hear
on
that.
several occasions, so
Yeah.
he was a good guy.
I was not active in politics until recently.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Texas State University and I've studied economics, which is not unusual for libertarians.
Yeah, sure.
I've never encountered that many people with a similar educational background in a room before, not being one of the major professions.
Sure.
But I moved to a new address in Midtown. That's where I live now. Before that, I lived in the Heights for a long time. And when I was at the new address, I went to vote once, and there were really no libertarian options down ballot.
Okay.
Went to vote for a second time, 2 years later, still no libertarian options down ballot. And so I picked up the phone and I called the Harris County Libertarian Party to try to figure out what was going on.
Okay.
And I got who was and is the secretary of the Harris County Libertarian Party, Tom Glass, on the phone.
Tom.
And I asked him if there were some ballot access issues or what sort of challenges we were having, and he said, no, we just don't have a lot of people step up. And at that point, he began to ask me about myself.
Okay. Right, sure. Tom's a good recruiter.
Yeah.
So he knows talent when he sees it.
When I first met with him, I thought that perhaps he was going to encourage me to run for the State House,
Okay.
which would be the 147th district.
District.
The State House.
Is that your district?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's in Midtown as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I thought I was being interviewed for.
Oh,
but
okay.
he said, no, we start at the top of the ballot and work down.
Okay, good. So what do you do in your day job?
I work in the oil and gas industry for a midstream pipeline company.
All right.
Doing supply chain type work, specifically something called strategic sourcing.
Okay.
It's not very glamorous.
Whatever.
I understand you used to work in the oil and gas
Oh,
industry
yeah.
as well.
I spent a number of years with Texaco.
There you go.
Non-existent now. One of those groups that couldn't figure out exactly how to manage all those natural resources and got co-opted by other people that could figure out how to do it. So, no, I was very fortunate to have a nice position in the oil and gas industry, and they treated me well. I hated to see them so vilified for providing energy to everybody in the world, that we can raise our standard of living. But there's a lot of competition in the oil and gas industry, and if you're not managing your assets correctly, you can find yourself. When I went to work for Texaco, they were the 5th largest company in the United States by stock market value, and when I left, they didn't exist, and that was in the career of 25 years. And so capitalism is alive and well, and like Schumpeter has said, it's creative capitalism, creative destruction in capitalist markets, which makes sure that the people that know how to manage the assets are the ones that actually stay around to do that.
He coined the phrase creative destruction.
Right.
But perhaps the most famous quote that's attributed to him
Really?
it's one of my favorites of all time. He was not a humble man.
No.
I believe the
don't think
quote
it
goes
was.
something like this. When I was a young man, I aspired to be the world's greatest economist, horseman, and the world's greatest lover. But sadly, I've only succeeded at 2 of those things.
Oh, gosh.
Now, clearly, he was not the world's greatest horseman. So
Well,
it's
it
then implied.
Must have been the other, not too bad for 2 out of 3. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I always thought Schumpeter was a very interesting kind of a character because he predicted and I guess, still never changed his mind that the ultimate victor in the economic realm was going to be socialism. And it was going to be socialism not because of any failures of capitalism particularly, other than its failure to defend itself morally against the claims that would make them, that the inequality claims that would come up as a result of it. So he was very supportive of entrepreneurs. As a matter of fact, he was a champion of entrepreneurship as to how societies really change. It's the entrepreneurs in society that change things. And in socialism, of course, entrepreneurs are a non-existent class because nobody wants to risk anything. In socialism, the government wants to fund all the winners, and you know how that works out. The telephone company and whatever else gets all the money. So, but anyway, no, I thought it was interesting that he had such a pessimistic view, even though he was viewed as such a champion of capitalism. He still had a pretty pessimistic view of the long term about how people's minds would turn against the inequality of distribution that capitalism would. What do you think, Mark? No?
Well, if you want to talk about me,
Okay.
speaking about books, one of the first books that I read as a teenager was George Orwell's 1984. And unfortunately, 1984 has come and gone.
Yes, it has.
But the book still rings true today. And I think it's a classic that people should read because much of those predictions that were made or spoken about in George Orwell's 1984 are happening today. The violations of civil liberties, the mass surveillance state that we have, and the play on words. The famous phrase that he had in his book was, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, and in ignorance there is strength."
Yeah.
And that was probably the very first piece of literature that had a big impact on me to become a libertarian-oriented person. Was 1984.
Okay.
But there's been other events in my life that caused me to become a libertarian. First and foremost, I grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, a border city, where there was a constant presence of immigration enforcement. Immigration enforcement was part of the being. Also, close by were the missile range and the first atomic bomb that was blown up. So it was a military state. It had a lot of law enforcement, and at the same time, New Mexico had a local populace that had no problem with using marijuana. And so it was kind of inconsistent. There was inconsistent play in here. And so that's where my background is from. I graduated from Las Cruces High School and went to UTEP in El Paso down the river, which is actually on the border. Las Cruces is a little bit a ways from the border. And I got my degree in something that had nothing to do with politics or anything to do with the social fabric. It was a Bachelor's of Science in Medical Technology, a medical degree. And what I came to realize is how hard it was to get that degree, and when I got a job, how little it paid and how difficult the work was. That's when I decided that I was not going to continue with this kind of career for long. And I went to law school in South Texas College of Law and graduated from law school in 1992. So after that, I decided that the most important part of the law is when liberties are taken away from people. That's why I became a criminal defense lawyer and practice mostly criminal defense. I have practiced in other areas of the law, but criminal defense has been the predominant area that I have been in, practicing it. More recently, I have been appointed as one of about 150 property tax arbitrators. So you can appeal your property taxes to a property tax arbitrator. They're picked randomly by the Texas Comptroller's Office, and I'm one of the many that will arbitrate property taxes.
Excuse me.
Now, what caused me to join Libertarians was I got an email from some libertarians because I paid for the libertarian membership, kind of because I believed in it, but I didn't think I would be a candidate until I got some emails saying that they really, really need candidates who have law degrees.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially on the judicial level. And the reason being, of course, in order to be a judicial candidate, you have to have a bar card. You have to have been a practicing lawyer in the state of Texas for a certain number of years. For the position that I'm running for, Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, you have to have a bar card for 10 years. You have to have been a practicing lawyer for 10 years. It doesn't require that you practice in any particular area. But I have practiced in the area that I'm running for, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. It is a statewide race. It is for the whole state of Texas. And the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals hears criminal cases only from the intermediate courts. There are 14 intermediate courts in the state of Texas, which are courts of appeals. And then those appeals come from, of course, the criminal cases on the county and district courts. So the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is the highest level court in the state that hears criminal cases. A lot of people are confused because people think Supreme Court and Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, they're statewide courts. That's true, but the Texas Supreme Court hears civil cases and the Court of Criminal Appeals hears criminal cases.
Okay. Didn't know that.
And with that, what makes me different, I think, than many candidates is that I'm a strong, strong believer in civil liberties. I think civil liberties must take precedence over giving more and more tools to law enforcement. We have to, if we live in a civilized society and we're not going to turn into a dystopia, we have to protect civil liberties. And who protects civil liberties but the judges? The judges are the key to whether we're going to have civil liberties in our state, in our country, or not have them. And that's the beginning and the end of that. But people ask, well, what are civil liberties? Well, that the government does not perform unreasonable searches and seizures, that you have a right to due process, that you have a right to be heard, that you have your appointment of competent counsel. All of these are issues that you get a fair shake in the criminal justice system if you are accused of a crime.
Very good. Okay, so it's basically a sense of fairness that motivated you to get so involved with the political system.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
Okay. What particular authors or things that you were exposed to growing up, other than Harry Brown, made you so cognizant of the Libertarian Party, Luke?
Well, as Mark actually mentioned, 1984 I think was very influential, and I think it's relevant now more than ever. But also Brave New World. I'm planning on rereading that. Well, actually, I've ordered it on Amazon.
Okay.
And both of these books, these dystopian visions that the authors had, are describing futures that are only possible with technological changes.
Okay.
I think that a lot of the technological changes that they perhaps used as mechanisms in these books are actually being realized in our present.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some things going on right now that we need to be very, very mindful of and to watch closely. I didn't say we need to regulate them, but we need to watch them.
Would the Patriot Act be one of those issues that you would be keeping an eye on?
That goes without saying, but there are new technological changes that could potentially enable the government to control us in ways that has not previously been possible.
Okay.
And they should all be. They should all give pause to people. One example
give us some examples.
would be DNA tests that people mail in to learn a little bit about their ancestry.
I've done it, yeah. 23andMe, maybe, or yeah, something like
One of those.
that. Okay.
Well, that information that they're looking at and that they're storing is going to be more than just genealogical information. With data the way it is today, it's so cheap to store, it's likely that DNA data on you will be stored forever. And it could be stolen or it could be shared and used for other reasons that you're not likely to consent to.
Oh, okay.
And this is something that we may have all forgot, the Cambridge Analytica scandal from a few years ago.
Sure.
The more,
Selling everybody's email, or I mean, collecting emails and,
well, no, it's far, far more sinister than that.
okay.
People were providing personally identifiable information voluntarily, along with very, very sophisticated psychological profiles.
Okay.
Those psychological profiles, along with the personally identifiable information, were passed to a third party,
Right.
who then used that for targeting during the 2016 presidential election.
Okay.
So by knowing very intimate details about your personality, they were then able to manipulate you into doing what they wanted you to do
Okay.
at the polling station.
They really incent you to do that. I'm not sure that manipulate might be a little strong word, but for
Well,
some of us.
I think that a lot of people who wind up being easily manipulated, or perhaps all of them, they think that they're doing all of this
Oh, yeah. Sure.
of their own free will and accord.
Right.
And these are some things that we need to watch closely.
Okay. I certainly can see that would be a concern.
Yeah. So those two authors,
certainly for civil libertarians, for sure. So yeah.
those two authors were very, very influential.
Okay. Very good. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about Mark so far. What kind of reception or kinds of environment have you experienced so far in your race? Have you had a chance to talk to any of the forums for candidates, and if so, what do you tell them about yourself, other than you're a civil libertarian at heart?
Yes, I have been to some events and candidate events,
Yeah.
and I am usually the only libertarian judicial candidate at that event. And they are very surprised, many of the other candidates, judicial candidates, are very surprised to find out that there is no Democrat running in my race, that it's either me or the Republican. They're very surprised at that. And that's one thing. The other is there is a certain boldness. She wasn't a candidate, she was another lawyer, said, "You're very bold to run as a libertarian." And I think that's well said, because the more traditional step in line is to run under the other two-party labels. I just did not want to run on either party label for a very important reason. Judges need to be judicially independent and shouldn't be beholden to the political process or to the political system. And if you run under the usual party label, then you're not so independent as you would be if you run as a libertarian, because you're not beholden to the bigger political machine from the other two major parties. And I think that's important for voters to know, that the judges, if you vote for them at one political party versus another political party, then they are carrying the banner, so to speak, of that political party.
Right.
More so than if they were not to run under a political party banner.
Sure. I see we have a phone call coming in. So, caller, do you want to tell us your name and pose a question for one of the guests here?
Oh, certainly. I have a question for. Yes, I'm Mo, and my question is for both the candidates. I know the judicial candidate can't really give his stance, but he can give his personal opinion. But what are both their opinions about these trans these trans policies that the president's trying to push?
What would be an example?
Oh, like getting the trans people out of the military, revoking trans people's passports, not issuing them birth certificates, not letting them change their names and whatnot.
You familiar with that, Mark? Or?
Well, a little bit. The most important role of a judge is to be impartial, but more importantly, everyone's rights matter, and judges should not decide a case based on that this person may not, especially if they're a transgendered person, that they're not the politically correct person for that particular party. So in other words, if you're a judge, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you should treat everybody with respect, and everybody's rights matter. And unfortunately, sometimes one particular party does not want to respect everybody's rights. They have a belief that not everybody's rights matter, and in particular, they're against transgenders changing their name, getting passports, and that sort of thing. I've seen that I'm in the civil side that you have to go to a particular judge if you want your name changed. I heard about that. Okay. My candidacy has nothing to do with that, but I have heard about that. Yes.
Luke, you have an opinion on that?
Mine does. Most of what you were describing vis-a-vis the military and the passports, which is the State Department, would be something to do with the federal office. You said your name was Mo, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Mo, I think we've met before.
Oh yeah, I know y'all both.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
Mo, I think that the government's job when it comes to, or role when it comes to document control, like passports, is to facilitate, rather than control, the free movement of people around the world. There are some treaties, I believe they were signed right after World War I, that set up the passport control system. And I understand that there's probably some language in those treaties that requires a gender to be on there, but I don't think that the government should try to impose any sort of anything on someone wishing to have one of those documents. So I think they should be issued one way or the other. However, the person that they're for, the person that they're designed to help move around wants. The military the question that you ask, I think, is something that's a bit more challenging. I know that we're now in a situation where women are allowed in all combat positions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it would matter then if you're male or female or somewhere in between. The details of which, though, I would imagine would be somewhat challenging for the Pentagon to figure out, but they could do it if they were told to do so by elected representatives.
So, okay.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Good talking with you.
Okay, we'll go back. Let's see. Wanted to follow up with what Mark had brought up and switch to Luke in terms of what issues do you find that you like to talk about or resonate with people at candidate forums that you've been invited to?
Thank you for asking that. As you mentioned at the beginning, both Mark and I are very passionate about criminal justice reform. And I've found that when I talk about, that's a very broad topic.
Sure.
But when I talk about the role of drug prohibition and also the way that policing and law enforcement is conducted, that those are two things that resonate very well with the folks in the 18th. So this would have a lot less to do with the court system and the criminal justice system after people are charged with things, but before they go to prison. The actual court part of it. You know, I think that I've become increasingly aware of the amount of damage that drugs do to people with the opioid epidemic. And be that as it may, I think that a lot of people at this point are starting to realize that drug prohibition has actually done more damage to Americans than drugs themselves could ever do. And that's just in the United States. Drug prohibition in the United States also has some very serious consequences for people that live south of the border in Latin America. The black market that's created here is supplied by the people that are very, very, very violent. We call them the cartels, right, south of the border, that are growing and processing and moving narcotics for consumption in the United States. And the violence that those cartels exact on people in Latin America.
Yeah, for what, 30 to 40,000 deaths over the last 10 years of gang-related deaths, turf protection.
Yeah, I think it's a bit more than that.
Really?
A lot of them, because of a lot of the folks who are likely victims of that are not counted as dead, they're just disappeared.
Oh, okay.
They just were disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we need to take some responsibility for that in the United States. That's something that our policies are doing to those people, and most people don't even in this country aren't even aware of that. But back to the U.S. Now that we're talking, we're on the verge of nationwide marijuana legalization, and I think that once that happens, and the sky doesn't fall, a lot of
it hasn't fallen in Colorado or California yet.
There you go. I think a lot of everyday Americans will then be receptive to talking about decriminalizing other narcotics. So just the way that we decriminalized marijuana in Houston at first. Small amounts that people are caught with, they just write you a ticket. Right? It's not legalized, it's decriminalized. But I think that's the next step, is to decriminalize drugs in the United States. And then if the sky doesn't fall, and it likely won't, we have examples like Portugal to look towards. Mm-hmm. I believe they decriminalized all narcotics in 2000? Some time ago.
Yeah, some time ago. There's enough for the data to be in.
Their overdose deaths plummeted.
Yeah.
Theirs are still going down while ours are skyrocketing. Yeah. So those people, they're not just numbers, right? There are friends and coworkers and family members. Okay. And we really need to get that under control.
Okay, we have another caller coming in with a question. So caller, please give us your name and state your question, please.
Good evening, David. This is Alan Vogel calling.
Oh, hello, Alan.
Hi, I'm a longtime libertarian, and I really would like to make a comment this evening. First of all, I'm really happy to see that you have two good libertarian candidates on there. I met Mark Ash some years ago and have voted for him more than once. And Luke Spencer I met fairly recently since he became a candidate. Unfortunately, I won't be allowed to vote for him, but I certainly would be supporting. What I wanted to do is comment on ballot access and the debate. The Libertarian Party is now one of only three parties that has ballot access in Texas. And that is a very difficult thing to acquire. The Libertarian Party has done that over a number of years, and you and I have worked very hard on that program. It's very difficult to get on the ballot, And yet, now that the Libertarian Party has its candidates on the ballot, we're excluded from the debates. There was a debate for the Senate last week in Dallas. There's a debate this Sunday between O'Rourke and Cruz in Houston. There's a debate coming up for governor in Central Texas somewhere. And all of these debates have excluded the Libertarian candidate. And I'm just wanted to make a couple of comments that, if you have to go through the process of getting on the ballot in the state of Texas, it's very difficult. It's absolutely wrong for those candidates to be excluded from the ballot. In fact, it's a civic disservice that Channel 13 and Channel 45 are doing to the local or to the whole state of Texas by excluding somebody that's on the ballot. There are many people who may show up, vote in November, who will not know who the Libertarian candidate is because those private organizations that are running the debates have excluded those candidates from the debate. And this is a disservice and really amounts to enforcement by the private groups that put on the debates of the Democrat and Republican candidates. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Certainly I'll be voting for Libertarians this year, and I hope that everyone else will pay attention in spite of the fact that much of the media is excluding us. So thanks very much, David.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So have you been invited to many candidate forums, Luke, or what do you feel like you've been excluded from anything that's going on, or how's that going?
So I don't feel like I've been excluded, but I'm not running for an office that's something like president or senate or governor, where there are typically televised debates that a lot of Americans will view. That just doesn't really happen for United States Congress.
Right.
I'm really at a loss. I feel like if the Libertarian Party, or the Green Party for that matter, had come across or come up with an idea that would be an effective way to address this hurdle that we face, that we would have done it already. And I just don't know. Maybe Mark does.
I don't have very much of an answer either. I think it's important that Libertarians do get into at least one debate with one candidate. And it should be either governor or senator, so that people can see the other perspective. And excluding Libertarians from the debate is showing the voters that the two-party system is not that open. They are, I've heard often the word used, duopoly, and they want to believe that they're the only game in town. If the two parties believed in transparency, they would not be afraid of at least one debate with one Libertarian candidate, even if it's for a short time period. And so, yeah, I would hope that voters understand that there is a third choice.
Yeah. The League of Women Voters used to be pretty good about the idea of having an open debate between all the candidates that were on the ballot. I think they've kind of receded into the background a little bit on...
That's not their doing. I think that after Ross Perot happened,
Oh, yeah?
that was taken away from the League of Women Voters.
Okay. Well, yeah, the Presidential Election Commission. Yeah, people they didn't want the League of Women Voters making decisions about who was going to be included. So the Democrats and Republicans got together and formed the Presidential Debate Commission, where they can make all the rules.
Very tellingly, it was initially called the Bipartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. Then they realized that maybe that's a little too revealing. They changed the name to the Commission on Presidential Debates,
Right.
which is headed up by two co-chairs, the former head of the DNC and the former head of the RNC. And it was created with the express purpose of shutting third parties out.
For sure.
I think that no doubt that takes place at the state level as well. There was a conscious decision that was made after Ross Perot that this can never happen again. I think it was an agreement, collusion, call it collusion if you will,
Yeah.
between both of the parties to do that.
Yeah. A lot of people have made the case if we only had Fords and Chevys to buy as a choice in the marketplace, that people would be very upset about that. But they don't seem to be as upset about just having two choices in the political realm. So.
And the two-party system that we have to an extent locked in, I think it's indicative of how sclerotic our democracy has become. If new parties were able to move in with new ideas and new people, and kind of as they became less popular, 50 or 100 years later, they would just go away and disappear, and new ones kind of came and went organically and incrementally, like in a parliamentary system or something in Europe. That would be the sign that that things are healthy. But I feel like one of our key functions is to be a sort of a safety valve. A safety valve for when there's just too much friction and too much heat in the two-party system. But
I think we may be approaching that kind of a boiling point in the culture these days, that people are realizing that basically on a lot of these issues, you don't really, if you're a libertarian, you don't necessarily have to take sides. You're not trying to force somebody else to do something that you want them to do, and you don't want them forcing you to do something you don't want to do. And so why can't we agree on a live and let live philosophy and get some of those more contentious issues out of the political realm?
I do want to mention something about the voters. Many times they mix up
voters. Okay,
the voters. They mix up libertarian candidates with independent candidates, and they sometimes say, "Are you running as an independent?" And say, "I'm running as a libertarian." And what they don't realize is that the Libertarian Party has been around year after year since 1971, now approaching 50 years. And other third-party candidates who are independent form their own party, and then when the candidate decides not to run again, then the party disappears. That's what happened with Ross Perot.
Cult of personality.
Yes, Ross Perot was Ross Perot's party, and we don't even remember the name. I don't remember the name of his party.
The Reform Party.
The Reform Party.
That's right. The Reform Party.
But it was a top-down sort of organization, a cult of personality.
Yeah.
Right. And when he was gone, it was gone. But we're grassroots, bottom up.
Yes, and I think that's important for people to know, that the libertarians are grassroots, and they field many, many, many candidates year after year after year through the election season, through the decades.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of, I think, libertarians that are historically motivated try to look back at things like the Republican Party. How did the Republican Party come into being, and what might we learn from history to do that? And I think, in my case, it's probably a big issue that is going to change people, like slavery did in the 1860s to allow a Republican to be elected. And I don't know if they're going to gradually let the steam out of the drug criminalization issue or not, but I still think it's a pretty potent issue to unite people against what presumably is a monolithic two-party opposition to that.
Yeah.
So, do you think there's any other issues out there?
Yes,
Mark?
there is. There is. Coming from the border, immigration, I think, is a very important issue, and I think that both parties are becoming very polarized about that issue on many different levels, and for different reasons. My candidacy doesn't have anything to do with immigration, but I think that's another polarizing issue, just like drug legalization is.
Okay. Well, you do get somewhat involved with that from your clients, right? In terms
Yes,
of,
as a criminal defense lawyer for the last 25 years, I have represented people in immigration crimes. One of the big ones being illegal re-entry, and then of course alien smuggling, and the third one, phony documents or false documentation. And the immigration crimes occur because we have a very, very limited number of people that the law allows to come in legally. Illegal reentry is deporting a criminal, and then someone who has a criminal record who may have committed crimes, and probably has committed crimes, and then comes back, so they've entered illegally. And alien smuggling wouldn't be a crime, for the most part, if our immigration quota system was not so strict. Our immigration quota system is so strict that it creates illegal immigrant problem. And of course, phony documents goes without saying. People want to show other people that they are present in the United States legally when they may not be. So there's a desire on the part of many people to be legal. And if the government would allow them to be legal, they would be. It goes without saying.
right. Well, is that one of the issues that you come across, Luke, and you talk about that into any detail?
Yes, I think first we need to do a autopsy and figure out how we got to the situation that we're in now.
Okay.
And obviously it's the Republicans and the Democrats' fault. They were in power. The Republican Party, the whole system is set up to benefit Republican politicians and Democratic politicians. It's not set up to benefit voters in the United States. It's not set up to benefit immigrants who might like to come here. It's not set up to benefit employers in the U.S. And here's how. Republican Party politicians have to first win a primary, right? And the people who vote in the primary are oftentimes nativist voters who would like to curtail immigration. The Republicans have to talk out of one side of their face to talk to that constituency, to move on to the next stage. As soon as they have the nomination, now they have to win in the general election, and they have to start talking to more mainstream voters, centrists, and they rely on money from big corporations to fund themselves. So they have to now start talking to big business. So I'm anti-immigration, I'm pro-immigration. Now, the Democratic Party has to do much the same thing. When those politicians are in their primary cycle, they have to talk to the people who vote in the primary, which are often people of color, okay, who perhaps just recently arrived 1 generation ago. And that's the people. Now, in the general election, they have to get a lot of funding from labor unions, right? Labor unions, they don't want immigration. So they change gears, talk out the other side of their mouth to get their campaign contributions, and then are a little more less friendly towards immigration when they start talking to their centrist voters in the general election. And that's where this cognitive dissonance comes from, is that both parties are talking out of both sides of their mouth.
And if I may add, Luke, that's why I call the immigration laws and the immigration system very, very schizophrenic. It just goes all over the place. Different programs, different criteria, different quotas. It's very confusing. There's a whole area of law that lawyers have made lots and lots of money of trying to get people to come here legally, stay here legally, become legal. And then of course, and now even in criminal defense, it's spilled over into criminal defense. We've gone from having from heavy regulation to incarceration. And those are the two mechanisms that the government is dealing with immigration: heavy regulation and incarceration. And it's becoming very, very expensive for everyone. And why? I just think that the United States is not such a small country that it needs to protect a small population. It is a very large country with a very large population, the third largest populous country in the world. Only 2 countries in the world have more people than the United States, namely India and China. And the immigrants provide a strength to our country that other countries would love to be strengthened by an immigrant population if people would desire to go there. The number one place that people want to go to in the world is the United States, and that
Is it still? Even in the
that
last couple of years?
that may change. That may change. That's what I'm saying. That may change, and it's no less may change because of the heavy regulation and incarceration that is happening to the immigration system. That may change. There are other countries that would love to compete as well. And yes, you could mention some if you want to. The ones that come to mind to me, of course, are Canada, Australia, Europe to a lesser extent, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know one of the, in going on to some criminal justice reform issues, one of the things that you talked about on when you've been on the show before is bail reform.
Yes.
And do I sense that that's making some headway in Texas?
It is making headway. It very much is. It's not only bail reform. We have alternatives to prison. That is also happening, especially with the drug offenders, drug problems. What has happened, and I'm going to read a little bit here. Some people don't realize that Texas has the 6th highest incarceration rate in the nation, and the most prisoners of any state, approximately 147,000. And half of those prisoners are nonviolent offenders. And bail reform is one necessary part of the criminal justice system to slow down and prevent the state from being overwhelmed with mass incarceration. Bail reform is where people are allowed to be out on bail and show that they will come to court and deal with their cases, either if they are guilty through probation or community service, and if they're not guilty, that they can build a defense and then the state can relook at their case and maybe even dismiss it if possible. Bail reform is very important, that we allow people not to just plead guilty because they are in jail and cannot provide a good defense and they don't have money to get out of jail. So that is why why bail reform is working, and the incarceration rate in Texas is going down.
Okay.
It is going down. So improvements are made. That's one reason. And of course there's other reasons, I believe, that I mentioned: drug courts, mental health courts, DWI courts, and other problem-solving courts. All of these courts help reduce the incarceration rate. And they're all coming online together with bail reform.
Oh, great. Do you have anything to add to civil justice reform, Luke?
Not to that topic.
Okay, well,
No, I know we're pressed for time here,
a
but
little bit, no.
in addition to what we talked about earlier, reforming prohibition,
Sure.
or the enforcement of it, I think it's also important to talk about the way that policing is conducted. I mentioned that earlier, and it's something I feel very strongly about. This is where I've found that we see the divide between a lot of lowercase l libertarians and capital L
Okay.
libertarians is on this issue. I've noticed it present itself on this more than any other topic. I think the capital L libertarians, like me and perhaps Mark, I'm guessing, I believe that when police interact with Americans, that they stop and detain and to start questioning and deal with laws governing how they interact, I think there needs to be some major legislative reforms in this area. I think that they need to be national because these are constitutional issues.
Okay.
I think that that gives the federal government authority to, in large part, create a minimum expectation of non-initiation of violence against Americans when they encounter law enforcement.
All right. You want to give us some examples of what things you find wrong with the current?
So a friend of mine, he was a combat veteran from, I believe, Iraq and Afghanistan, or perhaps just Iraq. In Iraq, a lot of the counterinsurgency that was going on was very urban in nature, where in Afghanistan, most of it was very rural, is what I understand.
Okay.
People have rights to have firearms in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're not illegal. Some people carry them around. The rules of engagement governing self-defense in the United States military for a soldier or a Marine in Iraq set a higher bar for use of lethal force, for shooting someone, than the rules of engagement that most police departments have in most states in the United States. Wow. Simply fearing for your life does not give an armed agent of the state license to kill someone. No. They have to actually point a gun at you, or shoot at you, or hit you in the head with a brick, or swing a brick at you.
Or whatever.
That's right.
Okay.
Simply fearing for one's life does not give a law enforcement agent.
And you think there's some federal legal guidelines that could be instituted that would cause that to be more
than
widespread?
more than guidelines.
Oh, okay.
We have constitutional amendments, and Mark could probably guess what the details of these would be.
Well, good. That's an interesting topic to end on. I think we've come to the end of this hour to talk to these two articulate gentlemen about libertarian ideas, something I always like to do. So I want to take this time to thank Mark for coming again, and
Thank you.
Luke for coming on the show in such short notice today. And as always, to thank our wonderful producer, Mark Pirtle, who continues to help us put these little get-togethers on, and is an invaluable support in terms of publicizing what we do. So hopefully you will join us next month at around the same time, and I'll try to have a couple of other guests here who can create some controversy and talk to topics about libertarian and libertarian interests in the political climate. And of course, the elections are coming up, so that's always going to be a hot topic too. So thank you, gentlemen, and appreciate you being here.